kind of give us a little synopsis about PPP, where we are now, second round, first round, for people that didn't apply the first time. And then Gary, we'll pass it to you to tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe some of the things you've experienced and some tips you're following. I know that things have been extended. And just some information on PPP, on the economics of COVID and how it's affected some of our businesses. So Justin, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I'm Justin Miller. I'm a lender over at United Bank, and I've been working on the PPP since last summer. So with what Davey said, I'll kind of get into the forgiveness piece first right now, since we are still in the forgiveness of round one. Round one forgiveness from last year is still going on. We are still currently working on that. They just extended it a little bit longer for those guys to get their paperwork in, but we have seen a huge sheet showing a 25% reduction in gross receipts from quarter to quarter from 2019 to 2020, and then just an application if they're going to use those 2019 figures. If they're going to use 2020 numbers for anybody that's applying for the second time this year in round two, we will need, if they are allowed to use 2020 numbers, we will just need either a 941 or a Schedule C from all four quarters for the whole year of 2020. And then we'll also need that profit and loss as well, showing the 25% reduction for those entities. Now, for somebody that wants to apply for the first time in this new round that we're currently having until May 31st, they can do that. We have seen at United Bank several new entities come to us that are already existing customers at United Bank that wanted to apply for this second round for the first time, and we're welcoming those until May 31st. What you need for that is the application, and if you do want to apply, I'll kind of backtrack a little bit. If you do want to apply, please come see us if you're already a customer at United. Just come in and see your local lender. They'll know what to do, and they'll know kind of the way forward for you, and they'll kind of walk you through it. Like we have a step-by-step process for people. So the documents that you need if you do want to apply for this round, it's your first time. We would need payroll documents from last year for 2020, as well as your tax documents, either your 941s or Schedule Cs from either all four quarters if you're using 941s, or your Schedule C for the entire year of 2020. And for anybody that doesn't have their Schedule C for 2020 yet, if you have a working copy, we can go off of that. And we'll also need, like I said, for anybody that's their first time, we'll need bylaws from the company, any kind of operating agreement, anything like that for that company, and we'll kind of go from there. And we don't, if this is your first time applying in this new round, we don't need to see the 25% reduction if this is your first time. Now, if this is your second time drawing those funds, we will need to see the 25% reduction.
Thank you, Justin.
No problem.
Here.
I'm Gary Boteler with Carr, Ingram. We're a CPA firm. My office is in Atlanta. I live in technically Sandy Springs, and if you wonder why I'm here, I have a lot of roots out here in the community. Went to Oxford College, have a lot of friends and clients out here, and have a cabin on Jackson Lake, and a member at First Presbyterian Church, so a good part of my life has been based out here. And I was amazed with the PPP program when the pandemic hit. I was surprised how quickly the government acted to get something put in place. And it was a big program, a great program, you know, for people somewhat on the backside of it, like Justin and I. The rules on it changed almost every week. You know, they put something out and had a broad picture, but not a lot of details. So as you went along, it was almost every week there were changes to it, new changes to the rules. The SBA had a list of frequently asked questions that just kept growing and growing, and even now things tend to change a little bit, but it's all in all a good program. And it was intended to encourage businesses that were facing a downturn to keep their employees on the payroll and get through the pandemic. And the application process, if it's a small loan, is fairly simple. They don't require a lot of information. And the way that you would calculate how much loan you apply for is you would take your annual payroll for 2019 and average it out per month, and you could get 2.5 months of your average payroll. And then the great thing about that is if you use the money for payroll costs or other qualified expenses, you don't have to pay the loan back. It's forgiven, and it's actually free money. When Congress first passed the law, their intention was you would get this PPP money, you would use it to cover your expenses, and have no impact on your taxes or what you reported on your tax return. And the IRS looked at it, and the IRS took the position that, well, if you paid expenses with tax-free money, then you can't deduct those expenses on your tax return. And that effectively made the PPP loan taxable as though it were income. And right at the end of 2020, in the act that Congress recently passed, they clarified that for the PPP loan, the money is not taxable, and the expenses you pay with the PPP loan are deductible, which is just a huge thing because it means you get the money and there are no tax consequences to it. And you get the loan forgiven if you demonstrate that during your covered period, and your covered period starts when you get the loan, and it can go up to 24 weeks. If during that covered period, you demonstrate or attest that you spent at least 60% of the money on payroll and employee benefits, and then the other 40% of the money you can use to cover things like mortgage interest, rent, utilities, and some other business expenses. So for most businesses, it's really pretty easy to qualify to get the loan forgiven, and it's a big thing and a big benefit to the businesses. And as Justin said, if you went for round one of the PPP, you can apply for a round two PPP without really having to provide a lot of information. As Justin said, you rely on your 2019 payroll numbers. You can, if you want to, go back and base the loan amount on your 2020 payroll numbers, where you would take your average monthly payroll for 2020 and qualify for 2.5 months. But for most people, it's easier probably to go with 2019. You know, one of the other things on the forgiveness part is you do have to demonstrate that you did not have any significant reduction in either employee salaries or number of employees. And for a small business and a small loan, that's pretty easy to do. For some of the bigger businesses that got bigger loans, particularly above $2 million, there's some pretty detailed calculations they have to go through. But for most of us, it's a pretty simple process.
Good. That's good information to know that it, in that last bill or that was passed at the end of the year, that these funds are not being taxed for the businesses.
Right.
So that's good information to know and to get out there. Justin, if you So if you're going to apply for PPP, and you send in your payroll or someone brings to you their payroll information, do the amount, how do you determine the amount that someone's going to get?
So as,
Or apply for, I should say.
so as Mr. Boteler said, we take their average monthly payroll and then we multiply that by 2.5 times. Now, if they are what we call they have a 72 NAICS, which is usually your hospitality industry, such as restaurants or hotels and anything like that. We multiply that by 3.5 times. Just for those entities, but anybody else it would be 2.5
Is
times.
that because they've been, just because they've been hit harder, the hospitality industry? Or
No, I
no
don't know.
other reason? Okay.
I think so. I think because, when you look at what happened with restaurants where they either had to shut down altogether or could operate at maybe only 25% capacity. Restaurants, it's hard to make money in that business anyway. And when you reduce the capacity, it's
Okay,
really difficult.
that makes sense. Sure.
I'm gathering that a mom and pop operation that does not get W-2s is not eligible.
No, they are. Somebody like a sole proprietor that files a Schedule C.
Yes.
You can, and if you're just a Schedule C, a sole proprietor, and it's just you, and you have your income and expenses and so
Oh,
forth,
right, same thing.
yeah, then I think the maximum you can qualify for is $20,833. There's a
How
formula,
much?
$20,833. Is that right? For figuring your payroll cost and the loan, the maximum payroll you can account for any employee or a sole proprietor is an annual salary of $100,000. And so if you take that and there's a formula that backs out some of it and multiply it by the 2.5, I think max comes out to $20,833. But if you're a sole proprietor and you have employees, then you can get a PPP on those wages that you pay to the employees also.
I have some tenants that have done that, but another one that hasn't applied, they're a mom and pop, and I'm telling them, at least they gotta look at it.
Yep.
I also have a charity. And I assume it's eligible, it has employees, but revenue hasn't gone down because we just make it up by gifts, so.
Yeah.
The actual rent of a halfway house is way down.
Charities generally qualify. There are a number of churches that have gotten PPP loans. There's some,
Of course, they have, churches give W-2s, so.
they
Of course,
do.
we have one employee that gets.
One thing that's interesting, you mentioned that your revenue was not down because one of the things on the application process is to check a box that you're applying for this loan due to the current economic uncertainty.
Yeah, revenues other than gifts are way down.
Yeah,
There would still be some uncertainty there, I would think.
yeah,
so.
there is, yeah. And we saw a number of churches that have applied for loans because they truly, at the outset of this, when they were not going to be meeting in person and just thought the giving was going to dry up altogether and apply for loans. And most of what we've seen for the churches is the giving has continued.
Been a huge boom for our church in Atlanta. We've got $300,000 to give it. So.
Wow.
And I know just in talking with chambers around the state, many of them, they are 501c6 have applied and been able to help as well. So I know that was later on. Go ahead. You have a question?
Yeah, I have been trying to apply first time. I'm a sole proprietor. My business established at the end of 2019. I have no history really established for 2019 of loss of income because of the fact my business didn't start until the latter end of 2019. So when I did my taxes for for 2020, there was no way to say, okay, there was a loss compared to last year because I didn't have that. So when my accountant did my taxes, he did me under, what was it, a S corp. And I came out not owing anything because I didn't have enough revenue or money that I made for 2020 to qualify to do any deductions. So when I put my application in through my bank, they told me that they needed a Schedule C. And I'm like, okay, if I do the Schedule C, I'm gonna have to pay. So it's like, I'm just like, okay, what do I do?
Well, if you filed as an S corp, then your PPP loan would be based on the wages that the S corp made, not the profit of the S corp. If you file as a Schedule C, it would be based on the profit on the Schedule C. And I guess to go to part of your question too about not being in business until the late 2019, I think if you were in business on February 20 of 2020, you qualify. And there's, for somebody that was not in business in all of 2019, there's a little bit different calculation, and I would have to look it up to see exactly what it is. But if you filed as an S corp and the S corp did not have any wages, I don't think you would qualify for the PPP.
Yeah, so with, I talked to, because I'm a bookstore, so I talked to other bookstores who have applied for the PPP. As a sole proprietor, because that is what my LLC is, as a sole proprietor, they were able to get it because I don't have payroll. It's just myself.
Well, and you know, when you're an LLC and it's just you, the default tax treatment is that you're a sole proprietor and you file a Schedule C. But an LLC has the option to elect what type of tax return they want to file, and you can elect to file an S corp. But even though you're what's called a single member LLC, because you elected to file as an S corp, the PPP is going to be based on the wages that the S corp pays. And it's so if you didn't pay yourself any wages out of the S corp, then when you think about how you calculate how much loan you can get, it's 2.5 times the average monthly wages. So without having any wages, that calculation is going to come out to zero.
So that means basically I don't qualify.
Yes, and I'm not sure that you could go back and undo your election to file as an S corp.
Okay.
I'm not saying you can, I'm just not sure if you can.
Yeah, because I got a call from my bank. They were asking for the Schedule C. And when I went back and talked to my tax guy, you know, he's like, well, then you're gonna owe. I'm like, well, what's the point of even trying? So.
Do y'all have any questions?
So the only way you can really get a PPP loan is if you go to your bank. If you're not banking with United Bank, for example, you don't qualify for a PPP loan. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, I mean, you can go to any of your banks. All banks should be doing this. We're working with United Bank customers on this second round. But you can go to your bank and any bank, and they should be able to do it.
But not every bank is offering PPP loans, correct? I went to my bank, Wells Fargo, and they said we're not offering it again the second time around, which is kind of surprising. So that's why I'm asking the question.
That is kind of surprising.
I know it varies by each bank, so I just didn't know if that's a trend.
Maybe you need to change banks.
I'm with Wells Fargo, so I don't know, maybe there is a number they have for the PPP loan for people who have questions and stuff like that. So I would advise you to call that regular 800 number for the bank and listen to the prompts, and I think you can use your prompts to the PPP and talk with someone there.
Do you, Do you have to be a customer of United Bank, or can you be a new customer
If
to
you,
apply?
if you open up an account with us
Okay,
and you become a new customer, you can apply PPP.
You've done it for non-customers.
What's that?
As a testimony for you guys, you've done it for non-customers and it's been a huge help to my tenants.
Yeah, if somebody opens an account with us, they open up kind of a business account, we can have that. Because everything that we require for a business account in our system is almost what we require for the PPP loan with, your articles of incorporation, your bylaws, all that kind of stuff, and your signature page. So.
Okay, good. Cindy, do you have a question? So if you go through the process and you apply, what is the timeline of receiving those funds? Is it in a lump sum, like
It is. So what we do is once you send your packet off to me, I kind of go through it, make sure everything's there. We send it down, to our credit department as a final verification that everything is there before we send it off to the SBA. Generally speaking, from what I've seen from this new round, once the SBA has received that application and all those documents, and then we have confirmation from them, it's usually 3 to about 9 days. Once the note comes back to us from the SBA, and then once we can disperse those funds, and it is in a lump sum. And generally, we, like I said, for customers that we have, we'll auto deposit that into their accounts right there, into the business accounts.
One of the things to mention about the PPP loans too, it's a PPP loan, but we've been talking about forgiveness and not having to pay it back. But if you don't qualify for the forgiveness, you pay it back over, I think it's now 5 years.
5-year maturity at a 1% interest rate.
Yeah, so, even if you don't get it all forgiven, 5 years at 1% is a pretty good deal.
free money on that?
Yeah.
Which it is. So speaking of forgiveness, that I was gonna say, I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, Justin, but all that they have to bring you back is where they pay that money towards their payroll, and it has to be 60%, correct? 60% towards payroll.
Yes, ma'am, and we haven't gotten word back from the SBA about how this new round is going to go, whether it's going to mimic last year's forgiveness or if they're going to go in a new direction. We have not received word. But if they do decide to mimic last year's, essentially what it is for that time of the loan, so that period of the loan, covered period, as Ms. Boteler said earlier, you have to give me your tax documents, so your 941 or your Schedule C for that time, your application, and then if you use the loan for just payroll, then we would need what we call a third-party payroll summary. A lot of people have QuickBooks, and if they're doing that internally, we do require some third party in there just to verify. But a lot of people have PEOs and payroll companies that they do use. So if a payroll company or accountant or PEO does send those numbers to us, we kind of roll with that. If they elected to use it with, as Mr. Gary said earlier, with mortgage interest rates or with rent or anything like that, we just need to see the invoices, essentially, and the method of payment.
Yeah.
For that. So if you use, for instance, Snap and Shoals for anything, we need to see an invoice of those months of the covered period along with the payments, either a canceled check or a bank statement showing where you paid those expenses.
And so how long after if you apply for PPP, you're awarded PPP and you get it for 24 weeks, or at what point do you get a notification to start that forgiveness process?
Generally, we would notify you that you need to start applying for forgiveness, because it's generally in its 10 months from the time of the loan.
Okay. About 10 months. Okay, good. Any other questions? Mr. Stoller, you made comment that a lot of your tenants have been able to use the PPP. loans, and, from that experience, has it really helped? I'm sure it's helped most of them.
But it got sent for some, the only reason they're open.
That's what we heard. So I guess, the message to get out is if you haven't applied, there's no reason not to apply. It can help you keep your doors open. Even if you've gotten it, try to apply for that second round as well.
And that's what we're telling people, you know, I wasn't in banking quite yet when they started last year. But from what I understand, you know, last year, the sense of we don't know when the funds are going to run out and everybody's kind of coming to the bank at the same time was the mad rush.
Mm-hmm.
But with this round, we have that date, you know, May 31st. So the funds are there. If you qualify and you're needing those funds, then most definitely please go to your bank or come to us if you're a customer of ours or want to open an account and apply for those.
Okay. Gary, any?
You know, one other thing just to mention, one of the other relief programs under all of this is what's called the Employee Retention Credit, or referred to as the ERC. And under that program, you can get a credit for wages paid to an employee for 2019, I think up to 50% of the wages, and for 2021 up to 70% if you qualify. It's harder to qualify than the PPP. To qualify for the Employee Retention Credit during 2019, you had to have, I believe it was a 50% drop in your revenue, or you have to be in a business that, because of governmental orders, was ordered to either shut down or reduce what they were doing. And what comes to mind with that is restaurants where, you know, they were said you can only operate at 25% capacity, and that would have a big impact on their business. They would qualify for the Employee Retention Credit. And so, you know, besides the PPP, you know, that'd be the first place to start, but then also maybe, if you were really severely impacted, look at the Employee Retention Credit.
Now, and I probably can answer this myself, but I know a lot of personal service, and I'm thinking of hairdressers, manicure, would any of them apply, be able to get that, because they're typically independent contractors?
I think it's a possibility. You'd have to,
Okay.
you know, if their revenue was decreased by 50%,
Right.
or if because of, you know, government regulations or mandates, their business was somehow restricted.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's good to know about the Employee Retention Credit. Before we wrap up, are there any other questions that anybody would like to ask? Any last comments from the two of you? I appreciate you guys being here to